Setting up a session with Snarky Puppy, the gear, how many converters you need for that.
Okay.
So go into kind of gear talk about what you would use on a session like that.
Let's start from the beginning. So like I'll touch down, wherever we're at, we walk in, first priority, I'll have my crew kind of already worked out at that point. It's usually a relatively small crew, but the first thing that we need to do, usually the songs are still being written. First recording is like 4 or 5 days away. The songs are still being written. People are still ironing out parts, so it's really fresh in the band's head. So kind of what I talked about earlier as far as being aware of the situation and what you can do to help the situation, help creativity flow. The first thing we do is we get that front of house cue board up. We'll talk about that more in a second. And we get stuff just whatever we can do to get them on headphones to where they can hear each other and start rehearsing. That's like main priority, all hands on deck. We don't sleep till it happens. Just go, 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 go. So once they're in that mode and they can go through things, that's where I can get technical and like tweak on things and get sounds and set up the recording end of things and all that kind of stuff.
While
they're kind of jamming.
Working out parts. That's cool.
And I'll touch on that real quick too, because there was a question that somebody had sent me about how do we take the time to do sound checks and line checks and all that other kind. Well, obviously line checks, you don't have to have the people in there, somebody can scratch on the mic or whatever. But as far as like getting the sounds and making sure that everything works, and I think the term he used was organize. So let me first start off by saying that that's the wrong term. And I'm not going to say it's disorganized, but it's kind of like you roll with the punches. Things are never going to go your way. No matter how much I plan one of these events, things always change in these events. So usually once we get them rehearsing, I'll kind of get initial sounds on them to where they're cool. We'll have a dedicated person. If I'm not mistaken, I want to give a shout out to Matt Recchia, also known as Rexon Effects. I think he's in the chat room right now. And I'm not sure if Michael Harrison is, but Michael Harrison did the Metropole record and the We Like It Here record, audience feed and cues. I'm going to talk about that. And then Rec Dog did the Family Dinner 2 record that we just did. And I don't envy his job at all.
That would be tough, man.
In the beginning, I did it all. I did cue mixes, I did audience feed, and I kept track of the recording, and I set everything up. So it's like, it's hard to really focus on the quality of the recording when you have all these other things going on. It wasn't actually until Family Dinner 1, I think, I'm pretty certain, that we had a separate person. And my whole reasoning with that is, I'm doing these audience mixes for people, but I'm not in the same room as them. So, you have your drums, you have all these ambient acoustical bleed in the room, as well as the bleed in the microphones and what they hear. So I can't make correct decisions in that kind of a situation because these people are part of the experience. They want to enjoy it, they want to be moved by it, and I don't want to shortchange that in any way. So what we started doing is we would we would use like I like the analog splitters because I'll tell you a horrible digital splitter story in a second, but we'll split the majority of the mic signals, not all of them. Sorry about that. That was my fault. Into the front of house / cue console, as well as the recording system. So he'll have certain things, like he might take the snare tops but not the bottoms, but I'll take the bottoms in the recording, and so he's making these stems on the fly. We'll start with Michael Harrison and what he did on the We Like It Here record. So on the We Like It Here record, there's actually, I want to say like 16 stereo mixes for individual sections. So like trumpet players might get their own mix, sax players might get their own mix, obviously Michael, and then you got guitars and everything. So these mixes are happening on the fly. It takes a special kind of person who likes a lot of abuse to try to keep up with that kind of stuff. I'm not exactly that guy, but I'm glad I know guys like that. So shout out to Harrison and Recchia. And that's what they do. So basically for the first 4 days, they hear their name screamed about 5 times every minute because people want to make adjustments to their cue system. Maybe something's too loud, you got to go to the cue box and turn it down. But while he's able to handle all those things, I can focus more on the colors and the tones and the sounds of the record and stuff like that. So it freed me up tremendously. And so not only are they doing these cue mixes because they have these splits, but they're also doing the audience feed. And so what we do is we'll actually set up this console on the floor with the audience. So they're hearing the same acoustical bleed and all these other things in their headphones, and they can make adjustments for it in their mix. It's like having your own personal mixer sitting next to you. So that's what's cool about it. The Metropole record was a little different. I'm trying to remember. I think it was like there was orchestra stems sent to Harrison, who had a matching console. It's kind of cool. It's like dueling consoles, but it was the same console for both of them. And he would do it to the band, but the Metropole had this really cool system. I wish I knew the guy's name that designed it. They actually have a staff guy there that made this cue system, but it's run by a computer, and every person had a box with like soft encoders, and so they could build their own mix with stems that you designate for it, but then he could get on the computer from where we're at, and if somebody's complaining that they can't hear something, they can see what their mix is and make adjustments to it.
Wow, cool.
Super freaking cool. I don't know why anybody around here doesn't do that.
So it wasn't like Aviom or Hearback or anything like
No,
that?
we did use the 16-channel Hearback on this last Family Dinner record, but that's something you set on the box. This was like,
Yeah, this is...
he designed it. It's like,
You can just go in there and change your mix if you're not necessarily sure what you're doing to yourself, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
because, I mean, when's the last time you had like a drummer or a bass
Yeah, get his
player that
mix
just
right.
turns everything
Yeah.
all the way up and they're like, hey, I can't hear something. I'm like, well, if you turn everything down. And this is another reason why I couldn't be that guy. Not that Mike or Spud or anybody does that. I'm just joking.
They tend to find the beauty in the chaos then, huh?
Well, you know, it's just gain staging. As engineers, we really pay attention to that, but when you're just trying to hear something because you're trying to play something, you're not thinking about all that kind of stuff. So being able to go through and make tweaks to that is really cool.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the cue system for Family Dinner 2. We used, I think it was new at the time, the Hearback 16-channel system. I should have like a picture to throw up, but I don't. So on that though, you could actually save presets, which in a way worked out really well for us because with all the singers that would come up there, they would all want a certain thing for their mix. So we could just save them on presets, and then we would have like a stage manager, Camilo. I don't know if you're out there, but Camilo did a great job doing all that. And so they can have their preset of how they want it, and then on top of that, Rekia, who was on that recording, would have snapshots on his console for each song. So like maybe the stem for keys would change for whatever knob it was on, but the settings he had would be saved so it would work with however their settings were on their cue box.
Okay.
It's a lot of work, and it's cues by nature are imperfect. You know, when you play music with everybody, hearing them in mono or, you know, whatever on your headphones, it's hard to creatively express yourself when you hear in those confines. But I guess in a way, having everybody in the room kind of helps because you hear the natural bleed and the acoustical bleed of everything. So even if you can't hear the trumpets really well or whatever, you can maybe take a headphone off, or you still have that ambience around you.
And maybe natural dynamics too, because they're in the same room. They can be like, all right, I know it's the trumpet player's turn. It's my turn to kind of stay quiet a little bit. And then, you know, looking at each other, it makes the trumpet player a real person, not just a track playing in the background.
Right.
You know,
Not
it's not just the stem. Yeah, you
That
see
also
the player
plays
there, it
into
makes
the-
it real. It makes the player. You let him stand out, and you
Right.
visually.
And that also plays into the stage layout too, because you'll notice. I got a picture.
Yeah, show us this crazy setup.
Well, I mean, this is from a. Shout out to Stella K. Well, make me a liar. I'll get that working in a second. But the stage layout is important because you want those open lines of sight, so you can have your visual cues and everything like that. There we go. Okay, so this is the Family Dinner 2 recording, and I know it's kind of hard to see. Over here Can they see my crosshairs?
Yes.
That's where we set up the front of house cue console, kind of in the back corner, because Andy doesn't think cue consoles are sexy and doesn't want it in the camera shot. So he doesn't put any lights on them. And so this is kind of the band, and you'll notice that everybody's just kind of in a circle. They all see each other. The audience would eventually end up being here in the middle on these risers in the back. That's Andre in the back, one of the assistants on the last record. I think he's also in the chat room. Shout out to Andre.
Chit chat with us, Andre.
So that's kind of the setup, and we're going to come back to this and just talk about the bleed issues and everything. And that's the little crane cam in the back.
Those the cues right there, the square, the white.
It is. Zoom. Whee. Yeah, it's kind of pixelated.
Those are the hearback or the other ones?
These are the hearbacks.
Right?
Yeah.
Wow.
The Metropole record was the one where we used the other ones. I wish I did have a picture of that. That guy's a genius. He should get a medal. But anyways, so this is like the console tape, and we label it up for everybody. Yeah. And basically, unfortunately, Rekia kind of had to just babysit everybody's cues, and that's the majority of where his time was spent. And then he would build up his audience mixes in the final rehearsals and the dress rehearsal, and then we would all just ride by the seat of our pants, because that's just kind of how it happens sometimes.
Yeah. So